Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing The Betrothed, I Promessi Sposi by Alessandro Manzoni, one of the great classics of Italian literature and arguably the most important Italian novel of the 19th century. Few books in Italy have accrued such bad karma as this one. This book's been hated by generations of Italian high schoolers. It's the book that's usually assigned as mandatory reading in Italian high schools, and few 16-year-olds have the patience for a 800-page historical novel about the 17th century. I actually didn't read this one in high school. I think my teacher knew that it would be a lost cause to assign it to my class. I read it instead when I was 19, and I actually really liked it. I didn't see the reason for all the hate. I found it quite engrossing, quite captivating, and I really liked a lot of the little asides that Manzoni includes, these little conversations he has with the reader, these little nods to the reader's enjoyment of the novel. And recently I decided to reread it 12 plus years since the first time to see if my impression still held up. It's really not hard to see why The Betrothed became such a canonical novel in Italy. Like all the novels that become mandatory reading in schools across the world, really, these are usually picked by the state because they provide a certain view on a given culture, a given country, a given people that the state wants to encourage, wants to cultivate in young readers. The Betrothed is a novel that is very sympathetic to the lower classes. Its protagonists are peasants from the region near Lecco in Lombardy, in northern Italy, but it also depicts these characters as somewhat childish, as somewhat in need of guidance and order and rules. It's a novel that's very critical of the Spanish domination in northern Italy in the 17th century, and that was written at a time when Lombardy was under Austrian rule. As such, it has a fairly strong patriotic vibe, but it's not really, it really doesn't have any kind of revolutionary or dangerously republican vibe to it. It's also a novel that's propelled by a very strong Catholic morality, a very strong sense of Catholic morality, but that it's also mildly anti-clerical. One of its key characters is a famously cowardly and hypocritical priest, and as such it fit very well the situation in Italy after the unification in 1861, where we had a society that was very traditional, very Catholic, but that also had some political problems with the church in Rome. That said, I don't want to give the impression that this novel was chosen from above by some kind of shady committee to impose a view on the Italian youth, because that's not really how these things work. And if the novel has been so successful throughout history, it's because it does capture the Italian psyche and some aspects of Italian culture really brilliantly. We have cowardly priests, we have gossipy, bossy women, we have abuses of power, we have bureaucratical complications, we have provincial pettiness, religious neuroses. All of this is basically Italy in a nutshell. The way people can be at once obedient and impertinent, the way the elderly try to impose their views on the young, the way everybody believes that they have the truth in their pocket and that if only they were in charge they would solve all of the country's problems. These are very much Italian traits to this day, and a lot of the conversations that occur on the novel very much remind me of the conversations I hear around my family's dinner table, although obviously on different subjects. The adventure of Renzo, the protagonist in the book, traveling from his small provincial village to the big city of Milan, also feels very contemporary, and he becomes the archetype for all of those provincials who come to Milan, get involved in messy situations, have a little bit too much to drink, and get scammed. I find it really amusing because I'm from Monza, a small city just outside Milan, and these days my family always talk about Milan as if it were a war zone, as if it's gone to the dogs, partly because of some media campaigns about crime in Milan that really try to depict it as this truly dangerous place. And I find that really amusing, because if you're looking for trouble in Milan, you can find it today just as you could find it 10, 12 years ago, just as you could find it 400 years ago. My own birthplace, Monza, is also featured in The Betrothed quite prominently, because it's the location of one of the most important and most famous secondary characters in the novel, the nun of Monza. She is, to me, by some margin, one of the most interesting characters in the book, because she's truly complex and nuanced. The story of how her oppressive father manipulated her into a cloistered life that she never really desired is compelling and convincing, and really shines a light on a truly multidimensional personality. By comparison, the other famous secondary character in the novel, the unnamed, l'innominato, this bandit leader that goes through, well, some kind of shocking process in the course of the novel, reads very much like a cardboard figure, very much like a black and white figure out of Dumas, but without the flamboyant adventurousness of Dumas' great characters. Both The Nun of Monza and The Unnamed are featured in fairly long asides, fairly long chapters that almost derail the main course of the novel and focus on them instead. And this tendency of the novel to lose track of the original story is at once its genius, and it can come across as one of its most frustrating traits. At its heart, The Betrothed is a fairly simple story about two young people who are in love with each other, who are prevented from being together by the abuses of a local lord, and who have to try and find a way to cope with this situation. But this story is derailed all the time by historical asides, by exposition, by small brief biographies of important historical characters from the time. And this can be truly stimulating and provide a very vivid picture of this world, but I can definitely see how, to some readers, this is going to be really frustrating and annoying. Manzoni is aware of this in the book, and at times he makes fun of the reader when he starts another historical exposition and immediately says, but I'm not going to bore you with this passage too. Or he even goes as far as saying, if you're not interested in this, if you just want to get the story of the protagonist, just skip to the next chapter, which I always thought is fairly brilliant. The second half of the novel takes on additional heft and significance as the story of the protagonists gets entwined with a historical tragedy of immense proportions, the plague that struck Milan in 1630 and killed thousands of people. These passages are really vivid, they're blood-chilling, and they're truly intense, and they're all the more haunting when you read them in 2024, as I did, having lived through a pandemic. A lot of the behaviors that are documented in The Betrothed, and Manzoni did quite thorough historical work on this situation, on how Milan reacted to the plague in 1630. A lot of these behaviors, I remember them from the pandemic in 2020. People stubbornly denying that a plague was occurring, even once the evidence for it became overwhelming, for instance. People looking for a scapegoat at all costs, wanting to vent their frustrations because of this disaster on somebody. People insisting on having big collective events, even though these were exactly the kind of events that were going to spread the pandemic, that were going to spread this disease. The plague chapters are a necessary relief for a book that is founded on a strong belief in the idea of providence, the idea that God provides for the weak and the meek, and that he looks after his children in his sometimes mysterious way. Some of the good characters in the novel, it's pious friars, its saintly converts, really read as almost over-the-top saintly, over-the-top good. And the plague chapters really explore, at the same time as the novel elsewhere explores the peaks of human piousness and charity, the plague chapters explore the depths of human depravity, the base behaviors people can fall into at times of disaster and death and tragedy. These chapters are truly horrifying, not so much because of the disease, which is horrifying in its own right, but because of the way people turn fratricidal, they turn morbid, and they turn murderous because of the disease, because of their fears and their uncertainty. There's so much to say about this novel, but one final point I wanted to mention regards the character of Lucia, the co-protagonist of the novel alongside Renzo, and one of the key enigmas of the book. Lucia is extremely frustrating. She is a shy, pious young woman who cannot entertain the thought of marriage without blushing as if it were some kind of secret shame and great sin. She's extremely angelic and really unbelievably good. Her predicament, which is already difficult enough in the course of the novel, gets complicated quite seriously by a certain vow to the Holy Virgin that she decides to take in a moment of great trouble, and that comes across as a little frustrating and self-harmful. At the same time, though, I would really be curious to hear a feminist reading of Lucia, because I realize that when I dismiss her decision to take this vow, in some ways I am infantilizing her, and I'm taking her decision-making away from her by dismissing her choice as infantile, as primitive and self-harmful. After all, she's the one who decided to take this vow. Can I really dismiss it? Can I really dismiss her religiosity? Am I entitled to do that? Renzo, in the course of the book, tries really hard to make her break this vow, and he comes across as at times borderline abusive, really insistent and really inappropriate. I'm just curious to hear how readers react to this, whether we can really be sure that we are entitled to think that we know better and we know what Lucia should have done. And I don't think there's an easy answer to this question and this dilemma. Her portrayal in the book reminded me closely of the character of Sue Brighthead from Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure, although Sue is portrayed with a much greater depth of psychological insight. Of course, that's a much later novel from much later in the 19th century. Ultimately, The Betrothed offers a convincing picture of a crucial century in European history. It is at times maudlin, but this is relieved by a commitment to realism and to veracity, and to look at some of the basest behaviors humans can engage in without looking away, without letting the author's own morality or religiosity come in the way of the novel, come in the way of the artistry of fiction. Ultimately, I think the question is whether a reader who doesn't have some cultural ties to the book or to the region discussed in the book would still find it interesting, whether readers who are not Italian are going to find something nourishing in the book. And I think you will. I think the human matter, the human material in the book is ultimately universal. This reads very much like a Walter Scott novel. Walter Scott was the model for Manzoni when it came to writing this historical novel. It reads something like Alexandre Dumas and a little bit like George Eliot, to give you a sense of what you could expect. If you are going to read the book, I'm very curious to hear what you think, very curious to discuss the novel in the comment section. I've definitely seen reading groups who focus on classic novels tackling The Betrothed, but I don't have a sense of how widely read it is beyond Italy. So I'm curious to hear from you, really. And if you are Italian, do let me know if you had to read it in high school and whether you hated it or enjoyed it. And I definitely look forward to talking about it. Thanks so much as always for watching the review. That's always great, and bye everybody.